Hi guys, it's me ChazzaHD and welcome to the final race reaction of the 2020 Formula 1 season and today's race that we are going to be reacting to and reviewing was a race that might go down as one of the worst Grand Prix of all time. It was unbearable. It really was. It was absolutely unbearable. The last 20-30 laps, just nothing happened. Nothing happened. It was this race for me was a 0 out of 10. There was nothing to it at all. The safety car, I mean, let's not really get into whether it was justified or not, the safety car coming out, because I mean, who cares? This track, you know, it's always going to produce horrible Grand Prix, but that was the final nail in the coffin, that safety car, for any possible interesting Grand Prix in terms of, you know, reverse strategies, you know, people starting on different tyres and maybe making it interesting in the last few laps like it was, say, last year where we had lots of overtaking on the final lap because of different tyre sets and all of that. That safety car just completely killed that. And then the last, well, since the safety car, nothing happened. There was lots of DRS overtakes. None of them were really that good. They were just, again, getting in a slipstream, pressing a button and overtaking. Wasn't really that exciting at all. Very reminiscent of the Belgian Grand Prix where it wasn't just passing with DRS. It was passing so easily with DRS. Like it was, you know, I said this before, like it was one car lapping another. Just horrible Grand Prix. Absolutely fucking terrible. And thank the Lord it ended, about an hour and a half ago. Thank the Lord it ended, because it was, and I'll say again, it was unbearable. At least you compare it to what is probably the worst Grand Prix of all time, the 2017 Russian Grand Prix. At least that Grand Prix at the end had, you know, some level of excitement with Sebastian Vettel hunting down Valtteri Bottas for the win. This Grand Prix, when I watched it today, I felt no increase in excitement within myself at all from the start of the race until lap 55. I just sat there and was just numb to what was going on. So horrible. Horrible. I'd rather there not been a race today, because, you know, it was just pointless, an absolutely pointless Grand Prix. You know, we're gonna keep racing here in at this circuit for another 10-20 years because, you know, pretty fireworks, money, and all of that. But yeah, just horrible Grand Prix. But stuff, I guess, happened. You know, results happened. An interesting change in the Constructors' Championship happened, which could really decide the future of a couple teams going forward into the next 2-3 years of Formula 1 racing. So let's just get into that. And by the way, guys, I am probably going to do this stream pretty quickly because, again, there was just no racing today. It was horrible. So we'll just kind of fly through the teams, because remember, I am going to be live later on with Nib to do a season review of course, the 2020 Formula 1 season, which will be a lot more interesting than what I'm going to talk about here. But if you don't know the results, because you didn't watch the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and if you didn't watch the Grand Prix, then you really did make a great decision today. Here are the results. So Max Verstappen winning the Grand Prix, taking his first ever victory here in Abu Dhabi. Also Red Bull's first win since 2013 at this circuit. Valtteri Bottas second, Lewis Hamilton third, Alex Albon fourth. This was probably the strongest Grand Prix Albon has had in his entire career. Will it save him? Who knows? But we know he doesn't deserve to stay. So yeah. Lando Norris, not Londo Norris, finishing in 5th place. Carlos Sainz 6th. We'll get into what that means for McLaren in a minute. Daniel Ricciardo P7, Pierre Gasly P8, Esteban Ocon P9, Lance Stroll P10. And then finishing the race, but not in the points, Daniel Kvyat, Kimi Raikkonen, Charles Leclerc, Sebastian Vettel, Ferrari ending the season in style. Russell 15th, Giovinazzi 16th, and then Latifi, Magnussen, and Fittipaldi. And then your only retirement, Sergio Perez, who of course started at the back of the grid for this Grand Prix because he had to take on a new power unit, which was, yeah, just not a good decision, I think, in the end, as we'll get into in a minute. So let's go through the teams. So Mercedes, not as quick as we thought they'd be. I thought they'd absolutely dominate this Grand Prix, but it seems the reason they didn't dominate is because they had some problems with the MG UK and were having to, I think, conserve the amount of power they were using. So Mercedes couldn't this weekend really go for it as much as they were planning to. And I think that's what allowed Max Verstappen to get into the position he did. I don't think the Mercedes car all of a sudden, grip-wise or anything like that, is now, you know, horribly slow compared to what it was, you know, a few races ago. I think it is down to that. Also, you know, Lewis Hamilton's just come back from illness, so he needs to really get back in the groove of things because, you know, missing one race after you've done so many in a row, it is going to take time to get back into the swing of things. And of course, now we wait 3 months until the next Grand Prix. It was always going to be a really tough ask for him to come back and just obliterate everyone again after taking that break. But yeah, I don't think there's anything really to worry about. I mean, they've got obviously both championships wrapped up. Lewis Hamilton, you know, he's been great this season. This is just a one-off. I mean, still finished on the podium, and he wasn't really that good this weekend compared to what he can do and what his usual level is. But I don't think there's anything really to worry about. Mercedes will be fine. This was just one Grand Prix. But yes, second and third for them today. Next up, Red Bull, the race winners. Max Verstappen, I have to say, did drive very well this weekend. Capitalise on Mercedes being a bit weaker because of that MG UK problem. And yeah, Max Verstappen just, you know, banged out a great lap in qualifying for pole position, and in the race, completely dominated it and did what he needed to do and what we were kind of expecting him to do. Let me just adjust that picture. There you go. That's Alex Albon's car, if you're wondering. Quickly going past in that picture. Yeah, Max Verstappen did what he needed to do. Great drive. Driver of the day. I'm not sure I'd say driver of the day, but I'd say driver of the weekend, Max Verstappen, definitely. Yeah, he did what he needed to do. Alex Albon, as I said a minute ago, he drove great compared to what he's done previously. Don't really know why he was so quick this weekend. It's not like last year he was quick as well at this circuit. I don't really know why he was so good. But he was very quick. He was very close. After the first run in Q3, he was very close to being on provisional pole position. He was only, a tenth and a half off or 0.2 off. So, yeah, I don't know why he was so quick this weekend, but I guess if he is going to stay at Red Bull, this is the Grand Prix that will be used from Red Bull's point of view as evidence that Alex Albon is good enough, even though we know he's not. But yeah, good weekend for Red Bull, of course. Race win, first race win since the 2020 70th anniversary Grand Prix at Silverstone. And thus now starts 3 months of hype about possibly Max Verstappen winning the 2021 World Championship and Red Bull producing a good enough car. Even though we know what's really going to happen. Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes are going to obliterate everyone yet again. And by the way, if you're out there and you think Max Verstappen's actually even going to compete for the championship, you're on a completely different fucking planet compared to, the reality that we're in. There is absolutely, in my opinion, there is absolutely no chance of Max Verstappen winning the championship next season. Absolutely none. But, Red Bull do this every season. They end the season strong or stronger, a lot stronger than they start it. And then we think, if Red Bull can just keep this going, then maybe next season, if they start next season how they finish this season, then maybe at the start of next season, Max Verstappen is going to win races and win the fucking world championship. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. How many years have we been going on about how, Red Bull just start the season well? They haven't started the season well since 2011. So, it's not going to happen. Red Bull are not going to be even close to winning a championship next season. I'd be surprised. Honestly, if you compare what the time gap or pace difference was at the start of this season between them and Mercedes, I would be surprised if it was smaller at the start of next season. I really would. Because I think Mercedes are going to, unleash an absolute monster of a car. I know they're taking away a lot of rear downforce, but, this is Mercedes. They'll still be a second clear in qualifying and be miles ahead of the races after 3 or 4 races. So, yeah. Red Bull doing their usual, we can be good when we want to and all that bullshit, but not going to actually manifest into anything, I'm afraid. We've just done this way too many times and disappointed us. This is why I'm saying this. But anyway, good weekend today. Oh, good weekend today. Good race today. But it doesn't happen anywhere near enough from this team. Next up is Ferrari. Ferrari, this weekend, I think they did pace-wise the best they could. They were never going to be particularly strong. And in the race, with Leclerc's penalty, they were just never really going to progress massively up the field unless they got lucky. Or, lucky with retirements happening ahead of them, gain positions, but also if there was a safety car at the right time, they could pit and, be on really quick tyres for the end of the Grand Prix and then maybe make up positions that way. With the way the race happened today, they were just never going to do anything. And I know, we had the safety car around, what was it, lap 10, 11, I think it was. Or maybe a bit later, I can't remember exactly. I'm trying to honestly put this race out of my mind, it was that bad. But I know people are saying, oh, why didn't Ferrari pit? Maybe with Charles Leclerc, you do have a point, because he was on medium compound tyres, and he did start on that compound. So I think with that, maybe you do have a point. But with Sebastian Vettel, I think they were right to leave him out, because look at what Daniel Ricciardo did. That's what they were trying to do with Sebastian Vettel. But because the Ferrari car is so shit, they're never going to... they're never going to pull off what Daniel Ricciardo did. They were never going to do that. Honestly, I thought Sebastian did well to hang on as long as he did ahead of Lance Stroll and, others like he did. I thought he did really well just to do that. And yeah, he finished in, was it 13th place or 14th place? Can't remember exactly. But, Ferrari were never, after that safety car, they were just never going to do anything. An awful season. Can't say, considering how the first 2 or 3 races looked for them in terms of speed and, them still making the same mistakes over and over again. I'm not really surprised they've had such a bad season. I am surprised, though, if you compare what I thought they'd be like this season, if you compare my thoughts to, say, this time last year. I didn't think Ferrari would have a good season in 2020. But I did not think they would drop into not just the midfield, but the lower part of the midfield and just be cannon fodder, which is what they've been most of the time. Will next season get any better? Probably not. I've heard, stuff about how Ferrari are very confident about next year's engine. Well, they're confident about next year's whatever it is every fucking year, and then we get to that next year and they end up being just as shit as they were, if not worse. Look at 2019 to 2020, they were excited about this new, what was it, drag or rake concept they had. And then look what it did for them. It made them even slower. So, yeah. Next season for Ferrari, I expect the exact same, if not worse. I just don't see how this team can get any better. Yes, they are Ferrari, but if you actually look at the quality of personnel, other than the drivers, they're not going to just go from 6th in the constructors up to 2nd in a season. It's just not going to happen. So, yeah, get ready, Ferrari fans. It is probably going to be more of the same in 2021, I'm afraid. Anyway, now into the midfield. McLaren, great result, 5th and 6th here in Abu Dhabi, and they have claimed 3rd place in the Constructors' Championship. And to be honest, if you look at the teams that have competed for this position, McLaren, Racing Point, and Renault, out of those 3, I think McLaren have been the best out of those 3. And I know you may be, saying, well, that's obvious. They finished, the highest. But what I mean is, McLaren have not had the fastest car out of those 3. In fact, I would say most of the time, they've had the slowest car out of those 3 teams. But the reason McLaren deserved to finish 3rd is because when it comes to race day, when the points are scored, they perform the best and have done this season consistently. That's why they have finished in the position they have. That's why McLaren deserve to finish in 3rd in the Constructors. Again, pace-wise, did they have the pace to finish there most of the time? No, they really didn't. Most of the time, they looked at the absolute best 4th in the Constructors, but mostly 5th. But if you look at what they do on a race day and the amount of points they score and the great performances by the drivers this season, they do deserve it. They were just, all around on race day, the most trustworthy team, I guess you could say, in terms of delivering. Racing Point had their Grand Prix where they really did deliver. For example, the race a week ago in Bahrain. But then would go and have what they had today, where Racing Point scored, 1 point, which is very poor, considering how quick I thought they'd be at this Grand Prix. And then Renault, kind of the same. Very quick at certain Grand Prix and scoring a load of points, and then they end up going 2 or 3 races without. So, without a doubt, McLaren do deserve 3rd in the Constructors. And today, both drivers drove absolutely great. Carlos Sainz, I have to say, especially in the last 5 or 6 races, I think his results have really been the thing that has carried McLaren over the line in terms of getting 3rd. I mean, I was looking at his results. They showed him on the TV broadcast. He's finished in the top 6 or 7 for the last 5, 6 races in a row. I mean, that is a great achievement in a car that isn't necessarily quick enough to do that consistently for that many races. So Carlos Sainz has really, I think, had a great season. I know he's not been as consistently in the points for the whole season as he was last season, but I think this season, especially in the first half of the season, he was very unlucky. I mean, look, he's finished 6th in the Drivers' Championship. If you look at the bottom picker there, 6th in the Drivers' Championship, only 20 points behind Perez. Carlos Sainz in the first half of the season was really hit with a lot of bad luck. Remember, he's running P4 at the British Grand Prix, and then, 2 laps to go, his tyre blew. Didn't get to race at Spa because of a reliability issue. I mean, how many points would he have scored at those 2 Grand Prix combined? Probably almost 20. And then I'm sure there was a couple other races where he did suffer some bad luck. So he really has had a great season, and I think has proven yet again why he does deserve to be at Ferrari next season. But yeah, well done to McLaren. Hopefully, they can build on this next season with a new driver lineup, Ricciardo and Norris, of course, and new power units, Mercedes power. Hopefully, they can build on it, because if Red Bull are not, really any better at the start of next season, or for most of the season, as they've been compared to this season, and McLaren do take that, say, 2 to 3 tenths of a second jump forward, McLaren could definitely compete with Red Bull for second in the constructors. They definitely can. They just need to make that 2 to 3 tenths of a second jump forward and hope that Red Bull just do their usual, starting the season slow and having poor reliability. We'll see what happens on that front. Next up is Renault. For me, driver of the day, definitely Daniel Ricciardo. That stint on the hard compound tyre was phenomenal. Very similar to the Mexican Grand Prix in 2019, if you remember that Grand Prix, where he did like 50-odd laps on the hard compound, then pitted and came out in, I think, 7th or 8th place. And finished in 7th or 8th place. He was really great that weekend. Well, not necessarily that weekend, but in that Grand Prix. Same here. Just a great race. Daniel Ricciardo is so... I'm trying to think of the right words to describe how great he is at the moment. He's so well-rounded, I guess you could say, as a driver at the moment. He's just so... He's really honed his skills. He's really... he's at the point where he doesn't really have a particular weakness. I mean, in qualifying, he's pretty quick. In the races, he's very consistent and quick. He's a great overtaker. He's very good at looking after his tyres. He gets the best out of the car 90% of the time, at the very least, if not 95% of the time. I mean, he really is at the moment at his absolute best, and I do feel sorry for him. And I know he's going to McLaren in 2021, and maybe, if McLaren make that jump forward, maybe he'll be on the podium 2 or 3 more times next season. But if he was in a Mercedes, Daniel Ricciardo is definitely... is he as good as Lewis Hamilton? No, and I still think Lewis Hamilton would beat him. But if he was Lewis Hamilton's teammate at Mercedes, I think definitely you would have more of a Hamilton-Rosberg, where you actually get a title fight going down to the final race, because Daniel is just so good, so consistent, and has been really on his game all season long. And I think this season, people talk about 2014 with Daniel, and that was a great season, 2016 as well. For me, this has been his best season because he's had quite a tough time in a car that, even though it was better this season, it was still a challenge to drive. He still had to really pull out all of the talent he had to get the podiums he did and the great results he did. And, in those Red Bull days, 2014 and 2016, he wasn't having to compete against as many drivers as he is now. Say in 2016, his competitors weren't really the Mercedes drivers, but were, Max Verstappen, and then Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen. And then in 2014, you had 2 or 3 more. This season, he's had Perez, Stroll, Norris, Albon, Sainz, his teammate Ocon, Gasly, Leclerc, Vettel. I mean, you've got so many good drivers all around that part of the grid, and he's had to be so consistently great to finish where he has. And again, given the circumstances that the car wasn't exactly on the podium pace-wise. The only reason they really got podiums this season was down to a bit of luck at times. A bit of luck that I think Daniel Ricciardo deserved, honestly. But, yeah, Daniel has just been absolutely brilliant. And this Grand Prix just exemplified that. It really did. Esteban Ocon also, I thought, drove a decent race. Nothing special. Good racing at the very end, but at that point I checked out. I didn't give a fuck what happened anymore. But yeah, Renault 5th in the Constructors. You'd think, with them having 2 podiums and being able to be in the top 5 in the Grand Prix a lot more, being able to fight for those positions, you would think that Renault would have finished at the absolute worst in 4th, but they finished in 5th, and I'm afraid they have only themselves to blame. In the first 5-6 races, they were just nowhere near the level they needed to be at. If they were in the first 5-6 Grand Prix, as quick as they were for the races after that, I think Renault probably would have finished at worst 4th, maybe even 3rd. But those first 5-6 races, they were just nowhere compared to where they were after that. And were basically where they were last season, where they were just disappointing. Yeah, there you go. That's Renault for you. And I guess that's the best way to describe Renault's project since 2016. Is just disappointing. And also so much potential, but very little of it was actually delivered. And that's a shame. Hopefully next season they can be quick and a bit quicker. But as long as Cyril Abiteboul is team principal of this team, I don't see this team really ever getting into a position where they can be a proper front-running team, because Cyril is just an absolutely awful team boss. Not as bad as Binotto, but that's not exactly an achievement. Next up is Racing Point, and this picture really does sum up, I think, the team's emotions. They had 3rd in the Constructors. I thought coming into this Grand Prix basically nailed on. I thought they were going to definitely secure that position. Even with Sergio Perez starting at the back, I thought, Perez is going to come through, still score some points, and they'll be fine. But then when Perez had this failure, which I think was a transmission failure, it was over. As soon as he had that failure, it was over. Because Lance Stroll, even though Lance Stroll has had some good races this season, Lance Stroll is not someone to be relied upon consistently like Sergio Perez, which is, of course, why I am disappointed that Racing Point, didn't keep Perez. And I know why they're not keeping Perez and keeping Lance Stroll. I totally get it. Pretty obvious why. But I think you look at this season, and I think the real reasons why Racing Point have not finished 3rd, it's 2 things. It's reliability, but it's also not with Sergio Perez, because I think Sergio Perez has had a great season. But Lance Stroll, even though he's had those races, in Turkey, at Monza, Mugello, even though he had his tyre failure, I thought he was very good there. Lance Stroll, despite the great performances in there, he's not consistently doing it. He's doing those great performances, one in every 3 or 4 Grand Prix. Now, for a Formula 1 driver, you can still be a good driver for this level if you have great performances, one in every 3 or 4 Grand Prix. But if you're going to be fighting, in the Constructors' Championship in the top 3 or 4 positions, you've got to be a bit more consistent than that. I mean, look at McLaren's driver lineup, Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz. Those two are rarely out of form for 2 or 3 races in a row. Normally, if they have a bad race, it's just one bad race, and then they'll go have 3 or 4, very good or great ones in a row. That's what Racing Point needed this season from both drivers. I think with Perez, they got it. With Lance Stroll, though, they just didn't get that consistency that they really did need. And yeah, it's a shame for Racing Point. It really is. But I don't ultimately think they deserve to finish 3rd in the Constructors. Because again, like I said earlier, when it comes to production on race day, they have not been the best out of those 3. I think McLaren have. I don't think they've been worse than Renault by any stretch, but I just don't think their production on race day has been as good as it should have been and as I expected going into the season. And especially when you consider the car they had at certain Grand Prix, they should have been scoring a lot of points at certain Grand Prix. I mean, easily 20, but then ended up scoring, say 15, when again, it really should have been easily 20 points at the very least. So yeah, Racing Point, I mean, they can blame others, definitely, for their I won't say downfall, but for the reason why they didn't finish third. But at the end of the day, with the car they had, they just didn't execute enough. It was a slight bit too inconsistent, if you know what I mean. They just weren't as good as McLaren were at producing on race day, despite Racing Point having a quicker car. And even Carlos Sainz said, I think after the Sakir Grand Prix, Carlos Sainz said that he thought third in the Constructors was wrapped up for Racing Point, and he had no real problem with it because Racing Point had, such a quick car. But then, look at today, just failed to get the result they needed. There you go. That's your third in the Constructors battle over. I'm trying to think to the first 3 or 4 races in my mind who I thought would win that battle. I never thought Renault would win it. Honestly, I think after Hungary, I thought Racing Point would probably win it. Because if you remember that Grand Prix, they locked out the second row and looked very, very quick. And I thought going forward from that, and especially if you go back at the Spanish Grand Prix, where they were incredibly quick, I thought as long as they can, do this enough, being so dominant at the front of the midfield pack, if they can do this once in every 3 races, they'll be able to finish third. But they just weren't able to. But now let's now fly through these final teams. So Pierre Gasly and Daniel Kvyat as a driver lineup is, basically over at AlphaTauri. Feel a bit sorry for Kvyat because he got a bit bad luck, I think, around the pit stops. That's why he didn't finish in the points. He dropped a position. Pretty sure he did because he wasn't in that bad of a position, it seemed. Going into the pit stops, he was dropping off a bit pace-wise and losing a position or two because I think his soft tyres were going off, but he was still in a decent position. I will say, though, Pierre Gasly, again, great drive, and for me, Gasly is one of the top 5 drivers of the season. He has had a great season. Finished top 10 in the Drivers' Championship in this car. Cannot praise the guy enough. And that is such a contrast to a year and a half ago where I think rightly I was critical of him because I just didn't think he was, at that moment, good enough for the Red Bull level. But, I mean, now he's definitely a lot better of a driver. And I'm excited to see what he does next season. And I think, honestly, AlphaTauri should think themselves unlucky, I think, this season. Because if Ferrari had not had, for example, that great result they had in Turkey, it would have been really close in the Constructors between them and Ferrari for 6th. I think AlphaTauri, as well, kind of Racing Point-like in these last 3 or 4 races. They've had a very quick car, but they've just not been able to execute on race day. Of course, Pierre Gasly qualifying 4th at Imola and running, I think, 5th before his retirement. I mean, if he had finished that Grand Prix, and then I think, was it Bahrain? One of the Bahrain races, they were very quick, and if they scored a few more points there, I mean, you never know what could have happened. And then, of course, the start of the season, first 3 or 4 races, they were just not really scoring any points at all. So there were a few races where AlphaTauri probably could have done a bit more to close that gap, but I think they've had a very good season. Of course, winning the Italian Grand Prix, what a magical moment that was. But yeah, I think they've had a good season. I mean, they have officially lost a position in the Constructors, but I think that is not really... I mean, you can't really see that as a failure, can you? I mean, this team compared to, Ferrari, Renault, McLaren, they're very small. You can't really expect them to compete with the big boys. But, when they do, you got to say they're doing a top job. And I think this season they really have. And Pierre Gasly, I think, has had maybe not the season of his life, because I think we could definitely see more from Gasly in a bit of a faster car. But if he is going to turn out to be, a top driver in the future, this will be that year where everything just clicked and he never looks back. And I hope it is, because this season he's had an absolutely phenomenal season. Final 3 teams, Alfa Romeo. Kimi Räikkönen, P12 today. Pretty good. And finishing ahead of both Ferraris. So, yeah, great drive by Kimi Räikkönen. Antonio Giovinazzi, by the way, won, officially, the qualifying battle between himself and Kimi Räikkönen. And I think people need to mention that more. Because, yes, this is not the Kimi Räikkönen of 2007 or 2005 and all of that. But to out-qualify Kimi Räikkönen over a season, you have to be a very good driver. You have to be. And I think Antonio, this season, despite the car not being that quick, has proved that he is absolutely good enough for the Formula 1 level. And as long as this car next season is quick enough, that Antonio will surprise people, a bit like Pierre Gasly. Maybe not as much, though, as Pierre Gasly. Next up is Haas F1. They were really fucking slow today. They were miles off the pace. Miles off the pace. Even before Grosjean had his crash, Haas have really just dropped off completely off a cliff in these last few Grand Prix. And honestly, I don't see it getting better next season. I think this team's just going to continue going downhill. And then if they don't get the new set of rules in 2022 right, I think this team will be off the grid very soon, because I don't see where this team is going. And then finally, Williams, pretty good race. Russell was 15th, I think, and at one point was in 14th place. So pretty good race by him. I think Williams, though, will be disappointed this season. I think they should be as well. If they're going to have that mindset going forward of being a team that wants to get back, not to the front, but back more towards the front, I think they should be disappointed that they have finished last in the Constructors. Because plenty of times this season, they could have scored, you know, a point or two. And I think, honestly, this season, they probably should have finished 9th in the Constructors. Because, I mean, you know, Russell at Imola could have scored a couple points there. Could have scored 4 points at the race in Mugello, but he had a poor restart. I mean, there you go. That's 6 points. So I think Williams should be disappointed. Yes, their car is still slow and poor, but given the chances that were given to them in terms of, you know, the door being open because of other people's failures, they just didn't capitalize at all. They just really didn't. Anyway, before we get to the final standings for the season, just want to quickly check in on you guys in the chat before we get onto the standings and basically the end of the stream. Sorry, by the way, guys, that the stream has been so quick, but this race was so bad. I just want to get this really over and done with. But remember, me and Nib will be live in about 2 to 2.5 hours from now. Do a full season review. Don't know how long it'll be. Knowing us, it'll probably be an hour and a half to 2 hours. But, yeah, make sure to join us for that, where we're just going to go through absolutely everything, cover it all, you know, how the teams have done, drivers, how good the races have been, top, say, 5 or 10 drivers of the season, all of that. Right, let's have a quick look at the chat. AlphaTauri got so good at the end of the season, says Tonka. They did. I think, honestly, this pace increase, if it happened a month or two earlier, they may have just nicked 6th in the Constructors from Ferrari. So, yeah. I mean, maybe at the start of the season, they could have been a tad quicker in the, you know, in the pecking order, but for them to be competing the way they were with Ferrari and the Constructors, and at one point Renault as well, that, you know, that's really the best they could do. I mean, last season, I think they would have been disappointed to not beat Renault in the Constructors, because I think they were better than Renault in 2019. But again, them just competing with Renault is a miracle onto itself, so can't really complain this season about them. from my perspective. But yeah, they were very quick in the last 5 Grand Prix. Just a shame they didn't show that a bit earlier on a consistent basis. Ferrari really screwed over their B teams, absolutely. Crystal Racing says Williams have finished with 0 points for the first time since 1977. Weird considering this year's car is easily better than 2019. That's the thing. I think that's when I say they should be disappointed. I think that just further proves, they should be. Last season, they scored, 1 point with Robert Kubica. And yeah, that car last season was easily the worst Williams car of all time. Easily. I mean, this car in pre-season testing was a second and a half, 2 seconds quicker than it was a year ago. And they've been the biggest gainer in terms of improvement pace-wise out of all the teams. But when they were given chances to score points, they just couldn't do it. Maybe next season, if they improve in the pecking order by, say, quarter of a second and are maybe on the back of, say, 12th, 13th on the grid, if they're around that area, maybe they can get a few points next season. But honestly, I still think this team is basically dead in the water. I just don't really see long-term where Williams are going. Right, let's find a couple more comments and then we'll get to the drivers and constructors standings. Crystal Racing says Racing Point have bottled P3 not just today but throwing away podiums at Nürburgring and Imola, and Perez breaking down at Bahrain race 1. Absolutely bang on. Perez was going to get a podium in that race, but then reliability failed him. Racing Point's decision to pit him in Imola was a ghastly mistake. It really was. It was absolutely awful. As soon as I saw them pit him, I knew it was the wrong decision because I knew because of the way that track is, you're just not going to recover that ground. And I don't think he did recover any positions. Maybe he did. Actually, no, I think he did 1 position, but it was just pointless doing that. He easily had enough pace and grip to hold off the cars behind. I mean, Daniel Ricciardo could, so I don't know why they thought Perez couldn't. Nürburgring, yeah. They had the pace there, but just didn't execute. I wouldn't say they should be too hard on themselves. And certainly not, if I can speak English, as hard on themselves as Renault should be, because I think Renault really bottled it this season. But yeah, I think Racing Point, you can't look at this season and say that they've been cheated out of 3rd place because of the whole deduction in points, and I don't think they can really go on about how they did the best they could, because I definitely don't think they have. They've just made too many mistakes this season when they were on for massive points hauls. Right, let me find a couple more comments. Ronan Brady, Gazza, do you think this race was worse than Russia 2017? It felt worse. I mean, Russia 2017 didn't actually have any overtakes after the first lap on track. We did here, but they were just, boring, pointless, easy DRS passes, which I honestly don't care for. It is right down there. This is at least the 2nd worst race of all time. Is it the worst? That's not a debate I want to be having, and honestly, I don't want to go back and watch the Russian Grand Prix of 2017 to determine what is the worst race of all time, because fuck me, that is that's something you do not want to be doing unless you are, an insomniac and you're desperate for some sleep. Right, let's find one final good one. Sebastian says Sainz beating Norris again in the standings despite the bad luck. No chance Norris beats Ricciardo. I won't say that. I think Norris definitely has a good chance of beating Daniel Ricciardo. Do I think he will? No. I think Daniel is better. I think Daniel is... I think the only difference really between Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris, because I actually think Lando Norris is a very similar driver to Daniel Ricciardo. The only difference really is experience. I don't think it's a case of, Lando Norris will never be as good as Daniel Ricciardo. I don't think it's a case of that. But yeah, I just don't. I think next season, I think you'd have to put your money on Daniel Ricciardo. You'd have to. Anyway, let's get on to the drivers and constructors standings for 2020. So, of course, Lewis Hamilton world champion, then Bottas second, Verstappen third. Rest of the top 10 is Perez, Ricciardo, Sainz, Albon, Leclerc, Norris, and Gasly. And then the rest is Stroll, Ocon, Vettel, Kvyat, Hulkenberg, Raikkonen, Giovinazzi, Russell, Grosjean, Magnussen, Latifi, Aitken, and Fittipaldi. By the way, Fittipaldi, I have to say, was really poor this weekend. I thought he'd do a bit more than he did in Bahrain, but yeah, I thought he was very poor this weekend. And here are your final constructors' standings. Of course, Mercedes are champions. Red Bull second. McLaren third. Racing Point then fourth. Just 7 points behind. Renault fifth. That'll be disappointing for them. Ferrari sixth. AlphaTauri seventh. And Alfa Romeo eighth. Haas ninth. And Williams in 10th. Yeah, guys. That is the end of the stream today. Sorry again it's being so short, but again, the race today was so bad. I don't want to spend too much time going into detail about this Grand Prix. Make sure to join me and Nib in a couple hours for the season review, where we're going to talk about, basically everything, cover it all, so that, we have all of our final thoughts of the season out there for you guys to listen to. Hopefully you will join us for that in a couple hours. Don't forget, you subscribe for more content like this. Also, if you want to know the content schedule going forward for, say, the next month or so, make sure to join us later on for that stream and stick around to the end of that stream, where I will tell you guys what is going down. But, yeah, thank you guys, so much for coming along. I know it was a really boring race, and you probably want to not see anything about the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix again, but, yeah, thank you guys for coming along. But, yeah, don't forget to subscribe. Share this video absolutely everywhere. Like this video. Don't forget to join our Discord server. In the description is where the link is. We have about, almost 500 people on that server. And it's definitely a good server to be in if if you're missing out on people to talk to about Formula 1. So if you do want to do that, then make sure to join my server. Also, my email address is in the description as well if you want to contact me for any reason. And I think I've covered all of the plugs there. But yeah, come back in a couple hours and you'll hear me and Nib go through absolutely everything that happened in